You were hired to clean the picture frames, not authenticate artwork. Richard Hayes snatched the cloth from Evelyn Morales' hand in front of the lawyers and advisors crowding the gallery. But when he ordered her to leave, the housekeeper who had served the Whitmore family for 14 years did not lower her head as she usually did. She looked directly at Daniel and said, "If you sign today, you may lose far more than this painting." The room fell completely silent. The cold afternoon sunlight cast a golden glow across the Beacon Hill mansion, where the loan agreement for Whitmore Renewable Infrastructure was about to be signed. Fewer than 2 hours remained before the deadline. In exchange for a loan of $320 million, Daniel Whitmore would pledge the mansion, the family art collection, a portrait of his mother valued at more than $80 million, and part of his controlling interest in the company. Unless the money arrived on time, more than 2,400 employees might not receive their paychecks that weekend. Daniel looked at Evelyn, his voice tense. "What did you notice?" She stepped closer to the portrait of Margaret Whitmore. A sapphire flower brooch rested on the woman's lapel. "It has 4 petals," Evelyn said. "Mrs. Margaret's brooch had only 3. Richard gave a dry laugh. "You want to delay a $320 million transaction because you counted the petals on a flower?" He immediately called Sebastian Cole. Through the speaker, the famous art advisor explained that painters often altered details for compositional reasons and described it as a documented artistic variation. Evelyn did not argue. She pointed toward the lower left corner of the painting. "There used to be a crescent-shaped crack here. Now it is gone, and the screws behind the frame are much brighter than the surrounding wood." Richard turned toward Daniel. "Are you going to risk the future of 2,400 families because of a housekeeper's memory?" The question struck directly at Daniel's fear. Delaying the agreement could push his father's company toward collapse. But the portrait was the final image of the mother he had spent far too little time with while she was alive. Richard signaled for Louise, the young employee who had recently cleaned the room, to step forward. "Someone must have damaged the frame. Perhaps we should begin with the person who touched it today." Louise turned pale. Before he could answer, Evelyn stepped in front of him. "It was not him. I noticed those screws 3 weeks ago." "So you knew and remained silent?" Richard asked, his expression immediately becoming accusatory. Evelyn tightened her hands. She understood that the admission could cost her job, but she nodded. "I failed to report it. That responsibility belongs to me, not Louise." Daniel studied her more carefully. "Why did you know to examine the varnish, the crack, and the frame screws?" Evelyn answered quietly. "Before coming to the United States, I worked as an assistant art restorer at a museum in Mexico." Richard curled his lip. "But you have no professional certification in the United States." "No," Evelyn admitted. "I came here so my daughter could receive treatment for a heart condition. I chose a job with health insurance and stable hours." The door opened. Maya Chen, the new legal advisor, entered carrying the contracts with a red flash drive tucked between the pages. "Before anyone signs, I believe we need to review Clause 9.4. Richard immediately took the documents from her. "It is a standard asset protection clause. We have already reviewed it." Maya did not release the folder immediately. For a moment, the red flash drive remained visible between her fingers. Then, under Richard's warning stare, she quietly closed her hand around it. Evelyn turned toward Daniel. "I am not asking you to believe me." I'm asking for 90 minutes and an independent expert. Richard lowered his voice. If the lender withdraws the offer, will you pay the wages of 2,400 people? Daniel looked at the clock, then at his mother's face in the portrait. Begin a preliminary examination. The signing has not been canceled. As everyone separated, Richard leaned close to Evelyn. When this is over, your time here will be over too. 40 minutes later, Dr. Amelia Grant arrived carrying a case of examination equipment. She closed the curtains, lowered the lights, and passed ultraviolet light across the surface of the portrait. The varnish glowed unevenly. Areas previously recorded as minor retouching extended across almost the entire painting. This is not enough to declare it a forgery, Amelia said. I need to examine the back. Richard objected, but Daniel nodded. When the protective backing was removed, a fragment of a blue label fell onto the carpet. It carried a storage code that appeared nowhere in the family records. Amelia sealed the label inside an evidence bag, then removed an extremely small pigment sample from the fourth flower petal. The analyzer began working as the clock continued counting down. Richard's phone vibrated. He activated the speaker. A representative from the lending fund announced that Daniel had only 30 minutes left to sign. Otherwise, the offer of $320 million would be withdrawn. The result appeared on Amelia's screen. She looked at Evelyn, then turned toward Daniel. This flower petal contains a synthetic pigment that became commercially available only in recent years. It could not have been part of the portrait when Margaret Whitmore was young. No one spoke. Amelia passed the ultraviolet light over Margaret's face once more. Beneath the familiar layer of paint, the outlines of a different image slowly began to appear. She switched off the examination light and said, "If this is a copy, the question is no longer whether the painting is authentic. The question is who took the original and what they are waiting for you to sign." Maya did not wait for Daniel to answer. She issued a formal notice suspending the signing ceremony because the collateral was now under dispute. The notice was immediately sent to the lending fund, the board, and the legal team. "This protects you," she told Daniel. "If we continue after learning there may be a problem, they could accuse us of knowingly offering invalid collateral." Richard struck the table. "One preliminary test is not enough to push the company into bankruptcy. If the painting is a problem, replace it with more of Daniel's personal shares." The room fell silent. Evelyn looked at Maya. That proposal changed the meaning of everything. If Richard only wanted to secure the loan, he could have suggested another asset. Instead, he wanted more control over the company. Amelia did not argue. She continued examining the portrait inside the temporary conservation room. Ultraviolet light showed that fresh varnish covered almost the entire surface. The pigment sample contained a color manufactured after 2018. Under the microscope, the canvas fibers and the fasteners on the back also failed to match the records from 1948. At that moment, Sebastian Cole arrived carrying a thick case of documents. He claimed that the newer materials could have resulted from conservation work and placed certificates bearing his signature in front of Daniel. Amelia reviewed each page. These records mention only surface cleaning and limited retouching. Nothing here authorizes replacing the entire canvas or repainting the brooch. Daniel looked from Richard to Sebastian. "If there was an accident during transportation, tell me now. I will handle it as an incident, not a conspiracy." Richard denied everything. Sebastian even signed another statement declaring that the painting inside the mansion was the original. The moment the pen left the paper, Daniel understood that both men had chosen a path from which they could not return. Richard immediately demanded a review of the security footage. The recordings showed Evelyn alone inside the gallery several times. He crossed his arms. "You have restoration knowledge, access to the room, and you remained silent for 3 weeks. Perhaps we are listening to a warning from the person who caused the problem." Every eye turned toward Evelyn. She did not look away. "I noticed the new screws and failed to report them because I was afraid of being mocked. That was my mistake. But I never removed the painting or touched the paint. Check my fingerprints, access records, and every camera. I will accept responsibility for my silence, but I will not confess to someone else's crime." Daniel looked at her gray uniform. For the first time, he realized that his own household had made a capable person believe silence was safer than speaking. Evelyn closed her eyes and tried to remember the day the portrait returned from restoration 6 months earlier. Then she opened the family ledger used to record valuable property. The wooden crate had white paint on the handle. The seal code ended with 4479, not 4419. Sebastian refused to let the staff inspect the back. "And Richard signed for the delivery." Richard said she remembered incorrectly. But the number 4479 remained in Evelyn's handwriting inside the ledger, recorded before the official documents were completed. On the return form, the second 7 had been altered into a 1. Maya placed the red flash drive on the table. "I preserved drafts from the company records after Mr. Hayes ordered the editing history deleted." Richard warned that she was destroying her career during her first month on the job. Maya connected the drive to the projector. "I once left a law firm because I was asked to hide the truth. I will not do that again." A comparison appeared on the screen. Clause 9.4 had been added at 1:13 in the morning through Richard's account. It allowed Northstar Strategic Credit 3 to seize the assets and receive voting authority the moment any collateral was declared invalid, without allowing time to correct the problem. "My account is used by the finance team," Richard said. Maya opened the authentication records. The change had been approved through his personal device. Using the code from the blue label fragment, the lawyers and insurance investigators traced the painting to Boston Harbor Fine Art Storage. The storage unit had been rented by Calder Bridge Holdings, a company with no genuine business operations. Calder Bridge and Northstar used the same registered representative, and a large consulting payment had been transferred from that company to Sebastian's firm. Marcus Reed, the storage facility's compliance manager, initially refused to release customer information. Only after receiving evidence preservation notices from the lawyers and insurance investigators did he lock the relevant data, security recordings, and shipping crates. The footage arrived shortly before sunrise. 6 months earlier, Sebastian had delivered a painting crate to the warehouse. 2 days later, Richard appeared and signed an order preventing any notice from being sent to the true owner. Daniel demanded that all movement of the artwork be stopped. Marcus checked the system and reported that a crate marked C-17 was scheduled to leave Boston for Geneva at 6 o'clock that morning. An image from an internal security camera appeared on the screen. Inside the crate was Margaret's portrait with the 3-petaled brooch. In the lower left corner, the crescent-shaped crack remained exactly where Evelyn remembered it. Daniel jumped to his feet just as Maya's telephone rang. Marcus spoke urgently. with warehouse alarms sounding behind him. Someone has just used an emergency authorization code to order crate C-17 released through the gate. The request was approved under the name Richard Hayes. Following the evidence preservation notice and the investigator's emergency order, Marcus stopped crate C-17 before it reached the gate. He locked it inside a controlled area, preserved the security footage, and disabled Calder Bridge's access. There was no chase and no violence, only a steel door closing at the right moment, keeping the truth in Boston. That morning, Richard entered the meeting as calmly as ever. He believed Daniel would be too afraid of market panic to reveal what had happened. But Daniel did not begin with an accusation. "We will begin with the evidence," he said. Under the supervision of insurance representatives and investigators, the painting from crate C-17 was brought into the room. The two portraits of Margaret stood side by side. Daniel asked Evelyn to explain the first detail she had noticed. "I only recognized that something did not match," she said. "The evidence must determine the conclusion." Amelia presented the ultraviolet examination, pigment analysis, canvas testing, and restoration records. The portrait inside the mansion was a recently created copy. The painting recovered from storage matched the materials from 1948, the archived photographs, and the documented ownership history. The brooch had 3 petals, and the crescent-shaped crack remained in the lower left corner. Maya presented Clause 9.4, the access records, and the data preserved on the red flash drive. Richard's account and personal device had created the mechanism that would transfer voting authority to North Star if any pledged asset was declared invalid. Marcus appeared through a secure video connection. He confirmed that Richard had signed the order preventing the true owner from receiving notice and had approved the shipment of the painting to Geneva. Sebastian jumped to his feet. The artwork was stored there for insurance reasons. Amelia placed his certificate beside the warehouse record. "You certified the copy as authentic while the original remained under Calder Bridge's control." Maya displayed the final document. Calder Bridge had agreed to pay Sebastian's company a completion fee immediately after the invalid collateral clause was activated. Every defense ended there. Richard looked at Daniel. "I did what the company needed. I built this empire while you merely inherited the Whitmore name. I intended to replace a weak leader before you destroyed everything." Daniel did not deny his own responsibility. "I trusted you without verification, concealed the crisis, and allowed lower-ranking employees to be dismissed. But those failures did not give you the right to steal, deceive, and use 2,400 employees as hostages." The board suspended Richard during the meeting. His financial access was locked, unpaid bonuses were frozen, and his devices were surrendered to investigators. Sebastian lost access to the collection, was professionally suspended, and faced investigation for fraud, theft, and falsifying certificates. The lawyers escorted both men from the room, but recovering the portrait did not produce $320 million. Daniel turned toward the board and disclosed the entire liquidity crisis. He agreed to surrender absolute decision-making authority in exchange for independent oversight. The new plan included selling the company aircraft and 2 non-essential properties, cutting executive bonuses before employee wages, negotiating transparent credit terms with independent banks, and protecting essential jobs and health insurance. Employee representatives would receive seats on the restructuring committee, and every transaction involving the chief executive officer's assets would have to be publicly disclosed. Daniel apologized to Evelyn before the board. "How would you like me to repay you?" "Do not reward me for doing the right thing," she answered. "Evaluate my professional record the same way you would evaluate any other applicant." Amelia assessed Evelyn's abilities and recommended her for a supervised certification program in Boston. Maya was appointed to lead ethics and compliance. She created an independent reporting system with protection against retaliation. Several months later, Evelyn completed her training and became assistant manager of the Whitmore collection after a clearly defined probationary period. She and Daniel also created a paid apprenticeship program for immigrants and adults returning to the field of art conservation. Margaret's portrait did not return to a locked room inside the Beacon Hill mansion. At Evelyn's suggestion, it was placed on long-term loan at a Boston museum, where it became informally known as the Three Petals. On opening day, Sophia pinned the real sapphire brooch onto her mother's jacket before the certification ceremony. The daughter whose heart condition had once caused Evelyn to leave the profession she loved was now there to witness her return. Daniel looked at the portrait and understood that Margaret had recognized Evelyn's value many years earlier. He had seen it only when he was close to losing everything. When he suggested that the painting might someday return home, Evelyn gently shook her head. A memory locked inside one room protects only one family. A lesson shared with the public can protect many more people. Under the museum lights, Evelyn stood beside the first group of students in the paid conservation program. She was no longer there to clean picture frames. She was there to teach them how to notice what others overlooked. A small detail changes a person's fate only when someone has enough knowledge to recognize it and enough courage to speak. Justice is not a gift handed down by powerful people. It begins when ability is respected, truth is verified, and the system itself is changed. What would you have done in Daniel's place? With only 30 minutes remaining before the deadline, would you have stopped a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars because of a housekeeper's warning? Share your answer and subscribe to Stewart Stories to continue following stories of love, hope, and justice.